Next up, we have another practitioner, teacher, and lifelong learner with an incredibly well-rounded background. An acupuncturist, a dean of students, a researcher in the ordained 23rd generation Daoist priest in the Quanzhen Longmen tradition taught by Josh Paynter, Jack Schaefer, and Rosen. Dr. Hoffman is one of those people who time just doesn't seem to restrict the way it does normal people. He's a doctoral candidate at Zhejiang Chinese Medicine University in Hangzhou, China, while handling all these student situations at Yosan University of Acupuncture and Chinese Medicine in LA, while maintaining his own acupuncture practice, his own cultivation practices, having a family. The list goes on. So if you have a secret, please share. But his current research delves into using mushrooms as an adjuvant therapy in cancer treatment and the role of Chinese herbs in T-cell regulation. And there's no one more qualified to talk about mushrooms in Chinese medicine and ancient Daoist texts than Dr. Robert Hoffman. So I'll turn it over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Sam. It kind of sounds embarrassing when you say all that together, but it's pretty common in my life not to have people wonder how I get a lot of stuff done. But I spent the better part of my adult life in the music industry, sleeping only 2 or 3 hours a night. So I'm a little healthier now, but I'm used to long hours. I just want to thank Josh and Sam for organizing this and gathering us all together, and certainly for inviting me to talk about my research. And I do want to send a special thanks to the other speakers, especially Larson Di Fiore. We haven't ever met before, but I really use the Brown Contemplative Studies Initiative and the work of Larson and Harold Roth as a roadmap for my own courses on Daoism and Qi cultivation. So I'm just very appreciative that someone in academia and such a prestigious school can develop a program like that. It's really an inspiration to those of us who are practitioners and teaching. I guess a little background might be kind of helpful. Like most, I guess, American men from the late 70s, early 80s, I was really into martial arts and infected by the Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee bug, and studied karate. But growing up in New Jersey in a Catholic Jewish household, my parents were, my mom was Catholic, my dad was Jewish. There weren't really a lot of resources, for a lot of us on here. You remember the pre-internet days when you couldn't find anything, and we would run to B. Dalton or Barnes and Noble and pray that the new karate or kung fu book was out there. But I was pretty serious and began to meditate in my teens, and then took a break for my music career in my early 20s, and then moved out to LA and realized I was once again surrounded by a plethora of amazing teachers, and started studying kung fu and tai chi, and then really got interested in more of the meditative and spiritual aspects of it. And that eventually led me to Chinese medicine school and the study of Daoism and Buddhism. And it was only in 2019, after many trips to China and all over Asia, not necessarily searching for teachers or a guru or anything like that, but I finally met Jack Schaefer and Josh Paynter of Parting Clouds. And that kind of helped really align my practices, and begin to sort out the differences of what Westerners call Daoism and what is Daoist practice. And now in my Chinese medicine world, I really try to bridge, which I think this conference has done really nicely. I try to bridge Daoist practice and traditional Chinese medicine, and also the scientific worlds. I definitely have my feet in kind of all those three places. So maybe that's why I don't get to sleep too often. I do have a slideshow. Let me share that. I do teach a lot, so PowerPoint is like where my life is right now. Let me pop that in there. Right, I think you guys can probably all see that, right? Make it a little bigger. All right. So when I was in the early 2000s, when I was kind of getting more serious again about martial arts and Qigong, a lot of my teachers were Chinese medicine practitioners, and that's eventually what led me to Chinese medicine school. And a lot of them were just kind of taking herbs, and I had no exposure to that as a kid. So it was a whole new world for me. Um, of course, Chinese medicine has a very rich history. Most practitioners here would be familiar with things like lingzhi, poria, fuling, and cordyceps. But within the text of Chinese medicine, the entire corpus of pharmacopoeia, there's things like yunzhi, coriolis, which is my primary field of study for my American doctorate, my DAOM. But then also the mushrooms I'm sure we've all heard of: agaricus, maitake, shiitake, lion's mane, and more recently chaga. If you read the kind of literature, or I should say the pop ads around chaga, they'll quote that it's in the Shenlong Bensao Jing, but it's not. But it is used now. And as Chinese medicine practitioners, we're very familiar with our patients coming in and saying like, hey, the guy at Whole Foods said I should be taking this. How do you feel about it? So that kind of branched out my research beyond the lingzhi, fuling, dongcheng shaozao kind of realm. But what I want to talk about today is really the connection between Daoist texts, Chinese medicine texts, and even the texts and art that predate Daoist texts. So some of you might be familiar with the Shanghai Jing, which is the classic of mountain and seas. This predates, kind of organized Taoism, and is tied as early back as the 4th century BCE. It's really encyclopedic. It contains mythology and geography, cosmography, and it talks about what we today translate as shamans, but the character Wu, which you see there, Wushan, shaman mountain. I think that translation shaman is problematic, but that's probably a whole other course, a whole other hour discussion on that. But we'll use that because it's convenient. So within the Shanghai Jing, there are many stories of these Wu or shaman. Some of them actually include the use of mushrooms. So there's a shaman priestess who transforms into a psychedelic mushroom after her death. And then later the story says that there's a king who ingests this mushroom and has some erotic encounters with the goddess when he visits the mountain. There's also spirit mushrooms mentioned in the Song of Chu, or the verses of Chu. This is attributed to Qu Yuan. And this text is also very mystical. There are elements of things that we would point to as shamanism. It's primarily poetry. Again, coming back to the Warring States, it talks about ritual and spirit journeys, encounters with deities, and a theme that we see move forward into Taoism: feathered people and chariots flying on dragons. And we see this later on in Taoism as a description of immortals. But the reason I bring it up here is that it does mention many plant medicines, specifically spirit mushrooms. And then in art, this is a much later painting. This is called Lady Shunwen Jun, giving instructions on the classics. She's talking about the classics here, referring to the rites of Zhou. And this little picture that I have here is really a zoom in of a much larger scroll. But you can see, hopefully you can see in that center of that planter, there's a large reishi mushroom growing there. So it's the use of mushrooms as an iconography is prevalent throughout. The term zhi, we associate that with fungi or mushroom. Obviously something like lingzhi or yunzhi, right, is where we would pull that from. And that's mentioned early on as well. Again, first recorded in the Warring States, in the Shiji, and then also in the Han Dynasty. Zuoyan was considered a fangshi, again, depending on your translator definition, master of esoterica, herbalists, alchemists, magicians, diviners. They claim to know the secret locations of Mount Penglai, which is a mythical Chinese paradise said to be located in the eastern seas where lots of Taoist immortals live. And on Penglai, there are of course, zhi or mushrooms. Also mentioned in the Huainanzi and Liezi, and it's probably at least a start to start thinking about zhi in multiple contexts and multiple meanings. So zhi is often defined as an excrescence, something that is an outgrowth. If you are in the north at all and see birch trees with the fungus that grows, many times that's chaga, that's an excrescence. But it's also a cryptogram. So that's something that emerges from itself, which is what a mushroom does. But within the synonyms, right, we can see lingzhi, meaning Ganoderma lucidium from a Chinese medicine perspective, but also being translated as numinous zhi or numinous mushroom, yin zhi, concealed zhi, and what I'll show in a little bit from some scholars, Zhao as plants. The Huainanzi records purple mushroom, zhizhi, and the Liezi describes kind of the environment that they grow in, growing in soil rich in humus, decaying from morning till evening. So not a very long life for them. Some sinologists there talk about this idea of soma and the fact that Indian legends talk of this soma or these mythical mushrooms that can lead us to transcendence. And they think that perhaps mythical jur derived from these Indian legends. And certainly in the early texts, we do see Feng Shi trying to convince emperors in the Qin and Han dynasty that they should finance trips to allow the Feng Shi on expeditions to find lingzhi, promising the emperors that they would come back with, elixirs, drugs, and mushrooms that can give the emperor immortality, or at least a long life. Shi Wangwu, very important in I think most Daoist lineages, certainly within Quanzhen Longmen, the sect that I'm a part of. She's known as the Queen Mother of the West, and she actually dates back to the oracle bone inscriptions, going back to as far back as 15th century BCE. She's often pictured here in the bottom picture. You can see her surrounded, in a beautiful garden. She's often in a palace that's full of beautiful pagodas and magical gardens. There's talk of eating lots of herbs, and there are a lot of poems, about her. When thirsty, they drink from the jade spring. When hungry, they eat jujubes, dots out dates. They go back and forth to the divine mountains, collecting mushrooms and grasses. Their longevity is superior to that of a metal or stone, the Queen Mother of the West. And here it's kind of an interesting picture on the top, that kind of lower quality, almost pencil drawing. That's Shi Wangmu sitting on top of a mushroom that looks a lot like Phly agaricus or Amanita muscara, which is a toxic mushroom, but is also a hallucinogenic. Shi Wangmu is important in the Daoist concepts because it's Shi Wangmu that receives the teachings from Taishan Laojun, the deified Lao Tzu. And then from Shi Wangmu, it moves into Baiyun Sheng, Shangzhen, and several other lineage holders, all the way till we get to Wang Chengyang. So Shi Wangmu figures very importantly in the lineage of Quanzhen Longmen. Most of us Chinese medicine practitioners would be familiar with Shennong's Ben Sao Jing. So all of those texts, all of those earlier mentions in these first few slides were not Chinese medicine texts, but Shennong's Ben Sao Jing is the earliest materia medica. And it's very different from what Chinese medicine practitioners are used to today, where herbs are clear heat, remove toxicity, release the exterior, all those types of categories. That's a much later development. Shennong's text breaks up the herbs into three categories. So there's the superior, the middle, and the lower. And within that superior, we do have herbs. We have lingzhi, fuling, baimuar. These are considered superior herbs that can be taken for long periods of time without side effects. And most of their descriptions will talk about lightening the body and conferring longevity. So if we have patients with us, and of course, we want to pay attention to their constitution and any current disease state that they're in, but assuming that everything is at some type of homeostasis, tonic herbs, these superior herbs can be taken without too much forethought and can be taken for long periods of times. It's the middle herbs that are more regulatory, and the lower herbs are, of course, toxic. I gave a talk a couple weeks ago at a psychedelic assisted therapy symposium. We talked about some of the psychedelics being encountered in this lower class of herbs, meaning don't take them all the time. Shennong's Ben Sao Jing mentions 6-jur. So here I'm using Sabina Whelm's text. She has a phenomenal translation of Shennong's Ben Sao Jing. From a TCM standpoint, we're used to the bitter, neutral, non-toxic, governs lumping in the chest, tonifies the middle, increases intelligence to prevent forgetfulness. Long-term consumption will prevent aging, extend one's life, and make one immortal. So consumed over a long period of time, lightens the body, staves off aging, and extends the years. That last line grows in the mountain valleys. So here, I think it's important to start noting, I'll bring it up again later, this is very important. Our last speaker talked about the Po, right? And what happens in the lungs right? And how our destiny is received. And it's interesting to me, looking back as well at Paul's lecture, and we talk about clumping and consumption and the stagnation of the body. We'll look at that as a means of disease, but also as a means of not achieving our heavenly mandate or not able to transcend our daily problems. So just plant that in your mind somewhere. Shenong also talks about purple reishi or purple jur, Ganoderma japonicum. Also sweet, warm, non-toxic. The typical TCM definition: governs deafness, facilitates the joints, fortifies the spirit, and augments essential qi. But in the Chinese, it also talks about lightening the body, staving off aging again, extending the years, and growing in similar types of environments in the mountain and valleys. So within those 6 jur, 6 different colors, moving to various organs and benefiting the qi of those organs. But there have also been attempts to relate those to various species. Zhao Jiding took each of the 6 jur from Shennan's Bensao Jing and related them to species that we know of in Latin. Of course, there's no, we're just trying, in this case, we're trying to take Shennan's Bensao Jing, or what were the remnants, put it back together, and then take references throughout time and other descriptions of those mushrooms to try to relate them to current species. But I don't think anybody can really say that that is a perfect representation, but perhaps it's a start. From a Daoist perspective, Dao Hong Jing, many of the Daoists and the practitioners in this conference will know Dao Hong Jing as the founder of the Shanqing school, an alchemist, an astronomer, physician, pharmacologist. He related the 6 jur, the Liu jur, to mountains: Taishan, Huoshan, Sangshan, Huashan, Hengshan, and Gaoxia. So many of these mountains will be familiar to practitioners of martial arts, certainly Songshan, and then also to Daoists, Huashan, Taishan. So that's an interesting tie-in. Of course, the mountains within Daoist literature, Daoist culture, Daoist practice are essential to asceticism, mentioned earlier by Johan this morning, but also as potential places for transcendence and the revealing of teachings from immortals. Lingzhi. So I left the simplified characters up above, but I think it's important to pull out the traditional character for Ling here. Spirit, soul, intelligence, something that has a spiritual power of efficacy. Huangdi of Huangdi Neijing is said to have had or possessed Shenling, surpassing normal human ability. And then if you look at Ling, below that again, we see that character Wu for shaman or medium. So when we say that something has Ling, and we see this character often in talismans and Taoist talismans, it's something that's divinely ordained. And then jur we take today to mean mushroom, but when we put Ling jur together, we're talking about, potentially something that has a spiritual intelligence, something ordained from heaven. And for fun, I actually looked up Ling jur in Pleco the other day. And of course, it gave the traditional Chinese mushroom. But then the secondary entry was interesting to me. It said, used in medicine, formerly credited with miraculous powers and considered a symbol of good luck. So I don't know where the miraculous powers went. There's some really incredible literature about numinous mushrooms, and Dominic Steveau from Santa Barbara has published, I just think, one of the best articles, and I definitely have a bunch of references in here. He's again another person I haven't met, but has been an incredible influence. So his article is called "The Marvelous Fungus and the Secret of the Divine Immortals," and what he talks about is perhaps this idea of Lingzhi as Ganoderma lucidium is meant to conceal the nature of numinous mushrooms. And I think to Chinese medicine practitioners and even some Daoists, that just sounds preposterous. But for those that are studying with a teacher, this might ring true. Daoist texts often have 3 levels of meaning. So there's the top level that, just anybody who reads the Lao Tzu, right, they derive some meaning. If they read the Qing Jing Jing, there's a lay person's understanding of that text. And then there's kind of a secondary level that someone who's working with a teacher or someone experienced in practice, would have like a more in-depth understanding. And then, kind of the fortunate and unfortunate part of Taoist teachings, there's always a secret meaning, right? There's always that third level of meaning that someone who's initiated or ordained or spent significant time with a teacher who's willing to pass on kind of that oral tradition may be aware of. So this idea that lingzhi in the text is being translated as Ganoderma, but within other teachings may be a completely different species or a species that's not even a plant, becomes kind of more understandable. There's a number of scholars who also feel the same. So Bokenkamp, Jur is a plant which appears and disappears as a divine gift and heavenly sanction of the state. It's not a product of earthly chemistry, but an emanation of heaven, the appearance of which provided or proved an auspicious augury for the state, marked a sacred spot, or confirmed an individual's aspirations to transcendence. The sources of these plants were the stars. Needham, Joseph Needham, Chinese Science and Civilization author and editor, believed that lingzhi may have been Amanita muscara again. And then Strickman also kind of confirmed that. That's not to say that reishi, Ganoderma lucidium, is not useful and can't confer those same properties that are in texts like Shennon's Bensao Jing or moving later into Li Shizhen's Bensao Gang Mu, but that there just may be another piece of this that we're not always privy to. Schipper also referred to Jur as entheogenic herbs, natural chemical products. So he described them as intrinsically perfect, spontaneously occurring, and a present from the gods, and perhaps a direct link to the Tao. As I already mentioned, Bokenkamp, Jur appear and disappear as a divine gift. They're not produced by earthly chemistry, but as an emanation of heaven. So why are Taoists concerned with this? Why do we care? What are we looking to do? Certainly this probably doesn't help us in our Tai Chi practice, right? But Taoists are often concerned with transcendence. In some cases, immortality. From a Quanzhen Longmen perspective, we're concerned with escaping perpetual rebirth, right? What can we do to not be bound to this human body so that we can connect more readily to the Tao? And within Taoist art and literature, we often see these, feathered xian, again, going back to those earlier pictures and those earlier texts, feathered xian riding through space or riding mystical beasts through the cloud, denoting the ability to travel, right, away from this mortal realm and up to the heavens or the immortal realm. Probably one of the most important texts, maybe the most important text. I won't say the most important text. The Taoist canon is, of course, 1,400 volumes, and I can't claim that I will ever get through them in my lifetime. But one of the most important texts, Gohong's Baopuzzi, actually describes hundreds of spirit mushrooms. And in the description, he talks about being able to ride on clouds, communicate with heaven, and meet with various spirits. There's about a dozen that enable one to ride on clouds. This is a description here of the black cloud spirit mushroom. It grows among black boulders on the shaded side of famous mountains. Its caps are black, stacked in 3 layers, covered by cloud mists. It tastes acrid and sweet. Consumed after they are dried in the shade, they will enable the body to live for 1,000 years without aging, ride on clouds, communicate with heaven, and see ghosts and spirits. All of these descriptions describe where they're found, their taste, and what they physically enable for someone who ingests them. There's even the description of Roger, and I put this in because I think it's just fascinating. So ro, you all know as flesh, so flesh mushrooms, and these were mushrooms or species of mushrooms that actually consist of these rare creatures, and he describes them as a 10,000-year-old toad, a 1,000-year-old bat, or a small figure riding a miniature horse-drawn carriage. So these mushrooms can be harvested or caught, processed, and they should be ingested. it's kind of out there. It sounds like a trip to me. Um, Importantly, and from a Taoist perspective, the gathering of these of these lingzhi, of these numinous mushrooms, there's ritual, and this is something that I've learned in my practice of Taoism over the years, and especially in these last 5 years. You know how important ritual is. So there are discussions in the Baoputsa about entering the mountains at the proper time, right? Looking at the calendar and performing the right calculations, performing the paces of you, and then specific methods of harvesting the mushrooms with a bone knife. So this is a text, this is from Ware's translation. Wherever excrescences or jur are encountered, an initiating and an exorcising amulet is placed over them. Then they can no longer conceal or transform themselves. They patiently await the lucky day on which you will offer a sacrifice of wine and dried meat, and then pluck them with a prayer or an incantation on your lips, always approaching from the east, using Yu's paces, and with your vital breaths well retained. So if you've been to a Taoist temple during a ceremony or a specific day, you may have seen Taoist priests doing the paces of Yu. And this is thought to essentially open a crack, right, in the universe, to reveal a space where the practitioner can enter the emptiness of the other world and even achieve kind of invisibility from dangerous influences or evil spirits. So it's really important that this idea of practice and ritual was essential to the recovery of these mushrooms. Some of the texts, and often in the Baoputsa, there's a description of fasting before. So this, of course, would be the primary fasts of, no lasciviousness, no killing, so a vegetarian diet, probably a simplification of the diet, moving to bigu, and then of course no lying and things like that. So there would be a preparation period of that. Gohong does have other texts that are not necessarily related to spiritual practice, and the primary there is the Zhouhe Beiji Fang, right? So the Handbook of Prescriptions for Emergency. And here he takes a twist. He does mention numinous mushrooms, but he spends a lot of time on Fuling. So those of you who know, that's poria, and it's used in Chinese medicine as, often just an assistant herb, right? Zhejiang Rensheng Baiju Fuling Gansao, right? It's just there to tonify the spleen and drain damp. But within the texts, and specifically within the Taoist texts, it takes on a much more important role, and it's used on over 20 prescriptions, I think, in the Zhouhe Beiji Fang. So there's also the Liujianse Gui Fang. This is prescriptions handed down by spirits. There are 16 prescriptions using Fuling in that, with no other fungus, right? It's primarily Fuling. Looking back at Shennong's Bensao Jing, right? Sweet balance. We know it quiets the heart and spirit, boosts the qi, regulates the constructive and defensive qi, boosts the spleen, drains the lungs, drains damp and heat from the bladder. Consumed over a long period of time, it calms the shen, nourishes the mind, and nourishes the hun and po, going back to the earlier lecture. Chinese medicine practitioners know generally fu shen, right? Spirit poria is a central portion. Fu ling pi, the outer skin, is a diuretic. Chur fu ling, the red layer under the skin, clears heat. And then fu ling ge is the whole piece of poria. It's mentioned in other texts, the Lingbao Wu Fu Shu. So fuling, a mushroom or excrescence-like growth on tree roots, is considered a transformed resin, which is peptic, nutrient, diuretic, and quieting, and will often be grouped with herbs like tianmendong, baiju, baishu, and others. The Tai Qing Jing Duang Gu Fa, the way to give up grain, refers back to the Wu Fu Shu. And then Sun Su Miao as Chen Ji Feng confers and concurs that these herbs are really essential for longevity. So why is such a simple herb that's really, I want to say kind of ignored in Chinese medicine, so important in the Taoist texts? When we look at the earlier lectures, Paul talking about the liver becoming stagnant, and then this morning hearing about the hun and the po and the liver and the lungs being this place where the souls, right, live, and they're here to learn lessons. They're here to move through patterns of lessons to help us transcend this mortal being in this mortal realm, the idea that things could become stuck in the liver and the lungs um, becomes very important. And the transformation and transportation of water and nutrients becomes essential. So if the spleen becomes deficient or damaged in some way, we all know from TCM, transformation, transportation is going to be hampered, right? So then damp accumulates, we become heavy. The lungs begin to fill with water, phlegm can be produced. This can turn into disease, of course, but it also creates think of all the cravings, right? All the desires. When the spleen is deficient, we crave sweet stuff, we crave terrible food. We might have a low appetite and then binge on certain things when we get really hungry. This idea of desire becomes really problematic. So suddenly Fu Ling starts to make just a ton of sense, right? To clear out the spleen, make it really efficient in its transformation and transportation, and allow for the other organs to process material in a more functional manner so that both our physical body can be healthy, but the physical body then does not create any obstructions or impediments in our spiritual practices and our spiritual growth. The Taishan Lingbao Fushu also mentions hallucinogenics. That's always a question when I mention medicinal mushrooms. There's always somebody who says, "Hey, what about psychedelics?" There is some of that in the text. There's a lot of it in the text, actually. But I did want to mention the Taishan Lingbao Fushu because it doesn't actually mention mushrooms. It mentions shanglu, which is a poke root, and it allows one to communicate with gods. So the root of shanglu is sour and poisonous. It cures evil qi in the heart, relieves swelling, and kills evil spirits. It refines the five viscera by scattering water qi. Here it is again, right there, right? It allows for the transformation of water, the dispersion of water throughout all the organs. The root has the spirit with a human-like form. It grows in fields and at old burial grounds. This herb is a divine herb. So very interesting. The Lingbao also has a very interesting discussion of the three corpses or the three worms, and it gives us recipes to remove these. There are lots of recipes. It was so interesting that Jeffrey Yuen was mentioned this morning. I'm actually going to give his recipe here, but there are multiple recipes of how to get rid of the worms. So these are the sanchong. These are officials within the celestial hierarchy. They are said to be the three spirits or realms of desire that can pull us away from our true state of consciousness and impede our ability to transcend. They monitor behavior within the body, and they go up every 60 days to file a report. So growing up Jewish, we were used to Yom Kippur, where on that one day we had to fast once a year and make amends. Daoism takes that kind of to a whole new level. Pengju, which is the head, is in charge of or monitors our desires, in charge of our future. Pengzhi monitors the chest, our attachments, to the past. And then Pengjiao is the sacrum and monitors kind of our present, like what are our habits today. The formula that I'm going to give today, again, comes from Jeffrey Yuen. It's pretty simple. Equal parts of the following herbs: Tu Fuling Yunzhi, which is turkey tail mushroom or Coriolus versicolor, Trematis versicolor, Shengdi, Chunjiao, Rogui, Homaren. So take equal parts of each of these herbs, soak them in rice wine for 3 days in the sun, right? Of course, we need the sun to pull in the yang aspect. Strain, dry the herbs in the sun, soak again for 3 days. And you want to continually do this, making sure all the alcohol gets absorbed. Dry that, grind up the herbs, add honey to make tea pills. And then there's a kind of a specific number of pills that have to be taken each day. And what happens is your bowel movements begin to change color. And based on the quality and color of your bowel movements, you'll know which of the corpses you've gotten rid of. So if you expel the corpses, you will no longer feel hungry. Your heart will be tranquil and without thoughts, and you will be able to attain extended life. So you notice that the formula is actually pretty warm, right? When you look at Chunjiao and Rogui in there, that's a pretty warm formula. And then again, soaking in the yang. So there's, to me, there's some aspect that we need this functional aspect of yang, right? To not just drain fluid, but to break up things and make sure the functional aspects of that transformation and transportation are kind of working appropriately. And of course, you could adjust the dosages of these herbs depending on the patient's constitution. Number of other texts that are important within the Taoist canon. If you've read any of the Daoist texts, you know they come with really long titles that I can never memorize. Essential instructions on the scripture of the reverted elixir in 9 cycles of the perfected of the supreme ultimate. So there's 5 mushrooms described in there. Lao Tzu's Jade Casket, this is the paper that that Dominic Stavoux, this is really the gist of his paper, is getting into the secret of divine immortals. And there's a complete description of Taoist mushroom usage there. And the secret of divine immortals takes this idea of mushroom usage to a whole new level and actually describes how you can cultivate numinous mushrooms in soil containing things like cinnabar. So that can lead to really essential numinous mushroom growth and usage. There's also the Numinous Treasure Catalog of Mushroom Plants. This is the Taishan Lingbao Zhizapin. And then the Esoteric Secret Writ of the 3 Sovereigns. And this lists 4 sets of 9 mushrooms. It again includes where they grow, along with the details of like their appearance and their benefits and how to cultivate them. The Numinous Treasure Catalog is really interesting, the Taishan Lingbao, because it actually includes illustrations to some really funky looking mushrooms, right? These all, again, are numinous, they extend life, they really confer immortality. The Taishan Lingbao, the Secret Immortals, the divine texts of the Secret Immortals, a lot of these texts also mention plant mushrooms, reishi, poria, things like that. But they're really clear that those medicinal mushrooms can extend lifespan, ward off disease, and in some cases even add several hundred years to your life. But it's the numinous mushrooms that can afford us immortality. These are the ones that promise the ability to ride on clouds and have celestial audiences. So again, I just want to emphasize like what we heard from Greg and Paul in their lecture is about like becoming stuck, right? From both a biomedical standpoint in cancer and from a spiritual standpoint. You know, if our Hun and Po are here to kind of help find our path and our journey in this mortal realm, but our diet and lifestyle and environment, you know, have created this damp and phlegm, and we're becoming stuck. We've got to break out from that, and the mushrooms like poria, lingzhi, provide the opportunity to do that. Not to mention the biomedical, you know, kind of cancer aspects that can be important in those mushrooms. Just thinking of something like lingzhi and its ability to free the circulation, clear the consumptive cough in the lung, that opens up the idea that on a very physical level, we have to prepare ourselves for transcendence and the ability to move on past this cyclic rebirth. I mean, I can go on, but I want to leave time for questions, so I'm gonna stop the share.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. That was I really didn't know how much was out there actually about mushrooms in some of these texts.
Yeah, it's amazing, and we're really, as you guys know, I hope Johan is here. Like, you know, we're at a renaissance in translation and publication right now. There's so much coming out. When I started looking at this kind of literature 18 years ago, there really wasn't a lot. And now it's like I get a ping every day, you know, of all these lists that I'm on, like, hey, check out this article, check out this article. And it's an amazing time to be kind of studying this stuff.
No, absolutely. This stuff is coming out left and right, and it's really awesome that you compiled it all into one lecture for us. The first first question we have in the chat here is, thank you for the insightful talk. 2 questions. Is there any mention in Gehong's Baopuzi of lion's mane's ability to improve cognitive function? I guess the second one.
Not that I remember offhand. Lion's mane shows up, you know, kind of in the non-medical literature a lot. It's considered one of these like beneficial foods along with like bird's nest and bear claw. Like if you had, you know, a high-ranking official, you would serve this very like specific meal that included certain foods, and lion mane is there. Um, but I don't recall that it's in the Baopuzza. But again, my photographic memory failed a long time ago.
Sure.
Maybe
Yeah.
lion's mane is the key to that.
Maybe, or maybe sleep. I don't know.
Could be sleep. Could be sleep.
No. Is there any mention in the literature? This is the second question. In general, of the use of psilocybin or magic mushrooms as a whole to treat mental or emotional trauma? Yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of mention of psilocybin, what's, you know, defined as laughing mushroom, a xiaojun, if I remember correctly, the Chinese. And again, this is a thing where, like, when I was doing my dissertation on mushrooms in 2017, like there was like nothing out there, and then all of a sudden, in the last few years, it's kind of exploding. And we just did this psychedelic symposium here at the school, and that's exactly what I spoke about. So there's like 200 species of psilocybin. There seems to be a lot of early mention of laughing mushrooms and plants that induce hallucinogenic episodes in the early literature. But it seems to, those references and the uses of those mushrooms seem to disappear at about the same time that Wydon kind of takes a backseat to Nadon. So I think we can potentially infer that the taking of external substances, including psychedelics, does take that backseat once Nadon takes priority. I don't have a reason for that. That's just kind of what I see in the literature. The other piece, which was kind of, sorry, was something about trauma or stress. Did I
Yeah, he was
remember that
asking
second piece?
if specifically if they ever mention any of these mushrooms to
Got it. Thank
be
you.
used for mental or emotional trauma.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So what the psychedelics are used for in the early Daoist literature and Chinese medicine literature is more the case of two, well, I would say two processes or two functions. Number one is to rid the body of evil. So ghosts, evil spirits, things like that. But I say this all the time to my students. I'm really cautious to link the possession of someone's body by ghosts or spirits with something like mania or psychosis. I think that's possible, but I don't think that's always the case. So I'm cautious about that. The other place where psychedelics are mentioned is in Taoist practice, is the use of creating a new set point. So anybody that's ever done psychedelics, you know, will tell you, even after one experience, that they never look at the world the same way again. So you can see why a Taoist who's looking to rid themselves of, say, familial burdens or work burdens or the burdens of, you know, the world of red dust, you know, you can see why a psychedelic might be used, you know, sparingly to kind of reset their parameters of what it is to be them, to who they are in this world, so that they can begin the practice of transcendence. And that seems to be the primary uses for psychedelics.
Sure, thank you. The next question we have, do we have a definitive, and I'll follow up with this, definitive book or books in English about medicinal mushrooms that you could recommend?
Oh gosh, I can see the cover in my head. Oh, what's his name? I think it's just called Medicinal Mushrooms. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name. Oh, it's killing me.
We'll see if it pops up, but if not, we'll put it on the YouTube when we end up going there.
Thank you. That would be great.
Yeah, the next, what I see is a question. I heard the code of the Bansao. I think you mean the Sheneng Bansao, Sheneng Bansao Jing, maybe. Starts with mushrooms. And could you elaborate on this? Does it start with mushrooms or not? And the mushrooms, yeah, and maybe elaborating on the mushrooms' relationship to other plants, if that comes up from your perspective.
You know, I don't remember the order of the herbs in Shenan's Bensao. I don't know. I don't remember. That's a good question. but its relationship to other plants, not really, certainly not certainly not in the Shennan Bensao Jing. It's very,
Mm.
it's very pinpointed. It's very like herb by herb. So I don't think it gives a relationship to other herbs. I just put the link to the book in the Martin Powell. There it is.
Oh, sweet. Yeah.
Sorry. So I don't think there's a link to other plants that we can describe. Not in the, you're probably thinking of like the mycelial network and the communication between plants, but there's nothing in Shennan's Bensao Jing about that.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't, from knowing the book just a little bit, it doesn't seem like it would be the place that they would put it in. Maybe perhaps another text, but I don't know where they would put it in there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something because there was so much in the talk that really, resonated. If anybody has any more questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. But Rob, that was really wonderful. I'm left with a
Thank
lot
you.
to kind of like consider going through this. I'll never look at fooling the same way again.
I know. I actually
That's pretty
have
wild.
I gave a lecture on fooling a couple of years back during COVID, and the owner of Real Mushrooms sent me like a huge brick of extracted fooling. It actually, I was afraid to drive with it because it literally looked like cocaine. Um, it was wrapped in kind of a watertight silver bag, and then that was wrapped in foil and then put in a plastic bag. I'm like, if I get pulled over, there's no way I can explain this. So I kind of unwrapped it and left it in the silver bag. But I do. It's a super high quality extracted fooling, and I'll just mix it in water and drink that by itself. With kind of as much, a lot of the work that I do is kind of stressful. So I feel like my spleen and liver are really hampered right now. So I've been taking a lot of Fuling by itself.
Totally. That leads me to another question that came up while you were talking is from your experience as both as a practitioner and also as a human, like you said, going through work situations that are stressful, what sort of mushrooms do you tend to use the most in terms of just like daily supplements? You mentioned that category that's beyond just herbs that you can take, so often the higher category of herbs in the Shandong Bansao. And so that's like, what kind of things from there are you working with yourself and patients?
Yeah, for years, I just took reishi like every day, nonstop. I've done a lot of fair number of trips to the Zhongnan Mountains and done fasting and kind of practiced, some qigong in the mountains, just eating reishi and drinking water for like a week at a time. So I was definitely feeling Johan's pain this morning when he was talking about his extended practices. So reishi was really my herb for probably over a decade. Even when I wasn't taking a Chinese medicine format, I was always taking reishi. That shifted a bit when I was in my doctoral program up at Five Branches. I kind of got really into turkey tail, so that became the primary mushroom. Like I said, right now, Fuling is kind of where I'm at. And I'll do that in addition, even if it's in a formula I'm taking already. If I'm taking, whatever, some Sejun formula, I might just drink Fuling tea by itself. And then I look to, there's a couple mushroom companies out there that are doing things really well. I worked at Dragon Herbs for a period of time, so I'm really comfortable with their products, and they have something called Four Kings. And then I've been a big fan of what they're doing at Real Mushrooms for a while, and they have something called Five Defenders. So if I'm just looking to, like, as we get into flu season, my daughter is about to go to pre-kindergarten and my son's in first grade, so they'll be bringing home every virus and bacterial infection known to humanity. So I'll be doing like just a broad mushroom overview of something like Five Defenders or Four Kings.
Awesome. I think that might have even answered the next question that popped up in the chat of, do you have a recommendation of where to get these daily extracts? And those two were dragon herbs, and the other one was
I really like dragon herbs, and I really like Real Mushrooms. Like there's a fair bit of discussion, and I would say at times controversy in the mushroom product world about mycelium versus fruiting body. I'm firmly in the fruiting body camp. That's where we didn't get into kind of the chemistry of mushrooms. But that's where all the beta glucans live. That's where the essential polysaccharides are, and it's the beta glucans. They have a specific linkage called a beta 1316 linkage that is really what potentiates the immune response in the body. And the mycelial products, first of all, they're grown on grain, And that grain is usually ground up with the mycelial product. So you're getting like a ton of rice or rye or whatever kind of grain they're grown on, along with the mycelial product. And then the beta glucan content within those is often skewed because if it's grown on rice, it has polysaccharides, right, which is a beta 1314 linkage, doesn't have the immune potentiating linkage. So they may show really high levels of polysaccharides, but it's the wrong beta glucan. It's the wrong linkage. So the fruiting body, you're kind of guaranteed that you're getting the right beta glucans and that they're actually going to potentiate this immune response. So we're at whatever you buy, look for fruiting body. And I know I'm going to get an email from Paul Stamets now, but in general, that's from my practice. That's what I give my patients, and that's what I take, with my family and for myself.
Yeah, you mentioned that you are, really mindful within this fruiting body and other ideas. You're mindful of like what else is going into the mushroom, right?
Yeah.
Are there anything that you look for in terms of like, how much emphasis do you place on when they talk about these mountains being home to these certain mushrooms? Have you played around with that and experienced that during your travels in China? Do you have any reflections on that from your modern perspective?
So wherever I go in China, I'm always cruising through the wholesale herb places, which is super fun. Although, if you kind of look at me like short-haired, tall, white guy from America, I think they think I'm from the FDA every time. So I don't know that I always get the perfect access to everything. But I do visit wholesale markets everywhere I go. And I've tried different mushrooms, from single growers, from farmers, but also from the large wholesale markets. And I have to say that I haven't noticed like a specific difference in where I've collected those mushrooms, but I do rely on like the high quality manufacturers, right? I can get the certificate of analysis and authenticity to tell me where that mushroom was grown. It was tested, through third-party testing. It's not filled with heavy metals, pesticides, and other things that may harm the body. So in general, I just rely, at this point, I rely on the kind of the manufacturers and their testing.
Sure. Yeah, it's much easier if you're not, able to harvest them yourself.
Yeah, I'm not, and carrying, I don't know if anybody's ever done this, it's not allowed, but I know people do. You can't really carry back raw reishi mushroom on a plane. When you get to the border here, have you visited a farm? Are you carrying any plants or vegetables? And it's like, mushroom's not a plant. It's dried. So not advisable, though I know people do it. I did bring back some mushrooms from some reishi, some purple and red reishi from Hong Kong once, and nobody seemed to have a problem. But I don't know that I'd try it again.
Yeah, totally. The reason why it made me think about that was, in conversation with Joseph, walking through the forest in New Hampshire, even, kind of going by like, this is lingzhi, but it's not really medicinal because it's growing on this part of the tree, and
Yes.
we can use it, but it's not the stuff that they're talking about in these texts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's again coming back to like the companies that I'm a fan of, like, Heiner Fruhoff and Classical Pearls brings up, another good example of a company. Like they're really paying attention to like, this is the DAO source. Eric Brand is really into this. If you follow any of his writings, like this is where the herb is traditionally known to be the best, right? Like astragalus is a good example. Huangqi, a non-mushroom. There's like a specific valley in China that grows the best astragalus, and even within that valley, on the right side of the mountain, on this side of the stream, it has a higher level of astragaloside 4 than the rest of the valley. So you want to get astragalus from that valley, from this side of the stream during this growing season, and that's going to have the highest levels of astragaloside 4. Now, we don't necessarily, as Chinese medicine practitioners, we're not totally concerned with all the constituents, but it's nice to know that there's a measurable footprint or a measurable fingerprint in all herbs that helps us define like where they're grown, right, and what their potential might be as a medicine.
Absolutely. I think even living in Central America and trying some of the same fruits and vegetables that are grown here on this soil versus a different soil, the taste, obviously we're not just concerned with taste, but we're Chinese medicine practitioners, and we can tell this is doing something to my qi that something grown in a different place is completely different.
Yeah, you immediately know. And I tell my students all the time, like, even if you're using granules, if you're using like a pre-packaged capsule, like open that capsule and taste it. If there's supposed to be cinnamon in there and it doesn't taste like cinnamon, don't use that product, right? You should still be able to come up with some idea of the herb. Um, and like wine is a great example. Not exactly Taoist, but like wine, like you can take a Cabernet grape, right? Take it out of Bordeaux, where it's grown on a specific side of the river in a specific type of soil. You can actually take that same grape, take a graft of the plant, bring it to Tuscany, and suddenly the flavor completely shifts. And then you take that same vine stock and bring it to Napa Valley, and it completely shifts. And as Chinese medicine practitioners, taste is everything to us, right? Taste helps us define what its trajectory is in the body. And if the taste is changing, then does it really have the same medicinal benefit? It may, again, chemically, it may, right? There may be still like the same beta glucans or whatever we're measuring, whatever constituent we're measuring. But from a Chinese medicine perspective, that taste is shifting, and that may not be having the same effect on the body that you anticipated from a DDAO source.
Yeah, absolutely. On Qi, and then even in a more rarefied way on Shen. If we talk about
Yeah,
some of these, you know, different mushrooms, that we're not just talking about physical health anymore. We're talking about different ways of affecting, our consciousness. Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think a couple more questions rolled in.
Sure.
One is we'll start with this one. Do you have a website for some of the work that you're doing with mushrooms,
Um,
or in general?
do I? I have, I think on the Yosan, the university that I'm a part of, I think on the Yosan University, in my bio, there's a list of my publications. And most of those are peer reviewed, and there's a few in like the empty vessel and things like
Cool.
that.
Yeah, we
I
can
do,
we
I
can
do have
attach
a,
that.
sure. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I have
Yeah.
a paper in review right now on turkey tail. Um, and there's a couple, like, every other researcher on this meeting knows they have like a dozen papers on their to-do list. And there's a couple others in there, one dealing with mycelium and fruiting body, and the other one especially on turkey tail.
Awesome. Yeah, we can link that in the YouTube when we go to upload,
Thank you. Thank you.
for ease of finding it. Another question that rolled in: any special mushrooms from the Wudang Mountains that they're famous for that you know of?
Oh, I don't know. That's a great, is Joe Sherfu here? I don't know actually. I don't know. Obviously, I'm sure there are mushrooms that grow on udang, but of the primary medicinal mushrooms, I don't know that udang is like a DDAO source. I'm sure it's there, but I don't know if that's like the primary growing region for any of them.
Yeah, I don't
I
know
can
about
look.
primary. Yeah,
Yeah, I can
Joseph
look.
definitely knows his mushrooms, so
Yeah,
they're present. I don't know compared to the rest of China, if they're
yeah.
specifically known for certain
No, that'd be
things.
a very cool. Um, like if you could go back to Dao Jing's work, and look at the specific mountains and the mushrooms that grow on those mountains. Um, it'd be kind of cool to work with those in that context. Of course, all the mountains also have a relationship to the 8 trigrams and the 8 immortals. Like there's a deeper level to that I didn't want to like bog everybody down in, but that would be a really cool process. I know when I spent a lot of time on like Taishan and Huashan and places like that, I didn't see, and maybe it's because they're so tourist heavy now, I didn't see, many mushrooms growing, certainly none that I would trust taking. But that's not I'm nervous about dying and eating the wrong mushrooms. So I don't tend to go out into the wild and pick mushrooms.
But I think that's a reasonable concern.
Especially in a country that I'm not totally familiar with.
Yeah, exactly. The last question that popped up that you can decide whether or not you want to speak to, because we're not, giving full medical advice here, is from G. Had chest pains and my acupuncturist said to stop taking Ganoderma lucid. Do you have any insight on that you want to share?
I mean, yeah, if there's pain, stop. um, Definitely listen to your healthcare provider. You know, Ganoderma is contraindicated for anybody on blood thinners because it does free the circulation and clears obstructions. So, yeah, if I had a patient on Ganoderma lucidium on lingzhi and they started to have chest pains, I would start to question their platelet levels and things like that, and would most definitely agree with that acupuncturist. But then I would also refer out to their primary care provider to get a complete blood count and see what's going on.
Yeah, there may be more to the story for sure.
Yeah. But yes, listen to your acupuncturist, and yes, go visit your primary care provider.
Awesome. I think that's the end of our questions right now. So, Rob, thank you for being here. This has been a great talk and discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
thank
Really,
you.
seriously, thank you for everyone.
Yeah, this is a great way to get all this information in one place from a particular lens. So it's an awesome presentation. Again, all these will be available on YouTube within a week or two after the conference, as soon as we can upload them. And we'll be back in a half hour, so that'll be 2:30 Eastern time. And David Wei is going to finish out our conference talking about the 5 hands of traditional Tuina. And so I hope to see you all then.